like Attila the Hun. I came here to conquer. Lanes bring the beef, I tell them no donker. They wanna play games, I shock them like Blanca. They still rudimentary, I'm tough like Tonka. And let me get this off my chest. I'm hearing going nowhere, so haters take a rest. Ain't nothing handed, just working hard, sweating. You can take that to the bank. I know I did bet.
What's good, everyone? We are back with another video, and before we get started, please make sure you show WOC some love, as well as give me a little bit of help with the algorithm. You know, drop a like, leave a comment if you feel like it, please subscribe if you haven't, and of course, share with a friend. But now we're gonna hop right into it. I'm just gonna give you a forewarning. This video is probably going to feel like an attack on a lot of people because this is an introspective video, but at the same time, this is a video where people feel like opinion takes precedence, but I'm not going to be speaking about opinion. So before we get started with the actual topic, are you diligent or are you ignorant? Now, the reason I asked this question is because stubbornness is way too vague to describe those two sides of a coin, because stubbornness actually applies to both of them. That's why I didn't say that. Diligence is a form of stubbornness because you are too stubborn to give up and you are too stubborn to let things hold you back. Ignorance is a bad form of stubbornness because at some point you are willingly not taking in knowledge. Now, this applies to all forms of life and gaming. Let's just be 100% real about that. However, as you know, we're going to zoom in on fighting games, so buckle up. So recently there's been discourse, especially about a certain individual who decided that they wanted to complain about fighting games and having to be quote-unquote frame perfect to do everything, and of course, they made the big mistake of saying, hey, I wish things were back the way they were in the 90s where I could mash and accomplish something. This is factually wrong. It is not opinion. What I'm about to say is not opinion. Games were harder back then. You needed to be more accurate back then because they did not read your inputs properly. Try doing things consistently in Street Fighter 2, or Street Fighter 1 for that matter. Anyway, this kind of just comes into the application of whether or not you're diligent or whether or not you're ignorant. See, nowadays, information is more accessible than ever, whether it's via a video, via a coach, via some sort of written guide, so on and so forth. You have access to so much information nowadays where in the 90s you didn't. You either knew or you just didn't know when you fumbled your way through. And the people that knew, they just kind of happened to stumble upon it, or perhaps they found the missing key while they were looking at the manual, which a lot of people don't do nowadays, and they really didn't do back then either. Or they were looking at the marquee on the arcade and they put in a lot of quarters and time to understand what needed to be done. That is the 90s. And the reason why it felt like you could mash and accomplish more in the 90s is because there was a larger percentage of people who didn't know what they were doing. Nowadays, fighting games are actually easier. They're more lenient on inputs, they have shortcuts, and it doesn't feel like you have to have a specific peripheral to actually play the game. On top of that, there are tutorials in the game now. Not all of them are good, but it's enough to at least teach you the basic stuff, and once you know the super basic stuff about the game, it's up to you whether or not you want to succeed or not. Remember, when it comes to fighting games, what you put in is what you get. If you put in effort, you get great rewards. If you just put in time, you might get a few rewards, but then you're gonna get the typical salt and rage that comes with, I put in X amount of hours and why am I not beating somebody? Did they do more than me? No, they didn't put in more time, they just put in more work. It's like any sport. You could have two people that play basketball all day long, 6 hours a day on the court, playing street ball or whatever. One of them might go pro. The other one probably won't even come near the other person's level because one of them is actually putting in work, learning and understanding the game at a deeper level. That's what happens with fighting games. That's actually what happens with games in general. And people nowadays tend to refuse to look to others for help because they feel like they're being belittled and they feel like, oh, well, so-and-so did it by themselves, so I need to as well. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Let me tell you something. I learned from getting my butt kicked all the time and getting very simple instructions. But it wasn't until I sat down and tried to learn more about the game itself that I was playing that those instructions actually meant something to me. And what did I do afterwards? I tried to help other people understand. There is no shame in saying that there was a spark or something that helped you get to where you're going, but that's a subject for a different day. There's a lot of subjects that branch off of this. But again, are you diligent or are you ignorant? Now, this is by no means to denounce whether or not fighting games are hard, because as I've said it and as Aria Mikado has said it multiple times, fighting games are hard. Now, are there fighting games that are easier to play? Yes. If you want an easier to play fighting game, play Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, play Blade Strangers, play SNK Heroines, play Smash Brothers. You want to know why? Because these games have an instant gratification for pressing buttons, and then you can go wherever you want from there on out. You don't have to worry about learning hard, fancy, painful for some inputs, anything like that. You can play the game. If you don't want to play those games, try playing Tekken, try playing Soul Calibur, try playing Virtua Fighter. In terms of instant reward, those games do the job. Trust me, because again, you don't really have to learn anything super fancy to get in the game and look cool, but just remember, fighting games are hard. If you want to know more, you have to put in the work. But you know what? You know what other types of games do that? Shooters, MOBAs. You're not getting anywhere until you start learning matchups, until you start learning how to build, until you start learning how to micromanage your time. And guess what? There are other excuses that people have as far as whether or not they can play fighting games. We're going to get into that in another video, but just understand that there's a lot of self-acceptance and introspective observation that you need to make before you start complaining about whether or not you can be good at video games, or in this case, fighting games. But I've definitely taken up a lot of your time, so we're going to revisit this subject sooner than later. But as I always say, be safe, take care of each other, press buttons, and catch you on the flip side.
Cause that's Genshin impact. Another enemy, another notch on my wolf's greystone. Teeter on the razors, and sometimes I feel I walk alone. I spiral abyss of a boss tail unknown. Believe in the power of a child. Shout out to Tectone. Queen Lorigine, Lion Fang is a problem. Barbarian gang, I can